Morning, everybody, or afternoon, wherever you are. I am Amy Vitale here, and I am so excited to be speaking with Brian Skerry. I'm going to call him, and I'm posting his amazing photo that is part of the Vital Impact sale. And if you don't know Brian Skerry, I'm sure most of you do, please. I mean, 4 decades of underwater photography and really revealing totally information. Are you there, Brian?
I am, yeah. Can you see and
Hi,
hear
how are
me?
you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, great
Great
to
to
see
see you
you.
too. Here, I'm trying to get out of the sunshine here. Okay, so
Oh, right.
I just rewatched some of the epi I watched the beluga whale and the a couple of the episodes last night, and I just wanted to do a shout out first for anybody listening. If you haven't seen The Secret Lives of the Whales, is it of the Whales?
Secrets
Secrets
of
of
the
the
Whales,
Whales.
actually. Yep.
I mean, it is incredible. Can we dive in and talk a little bit? I thought, since Brian is offering a photo in the Vital Impact sale of a baby beluga whale, which I have no idea how you got that, but maybe you could start by talking a little
Hmm.
bit about your image, and then we can dive into them, what you learned.
Yeah, absolutely, Amy. Well, just for some context, when I created Secrets of the Whales, it really was after about a more than a decade-long process. I had done a story for National Geographic back in 2008 about the world's most endangered species of whale, the North Atlantic right whale. And it really was just an endangered species. It's a species I was interested in. They live along the eastern seaboard of North America, from Canada down to Florida, pass right through New England where I live. And I just thought I would do a story that shined a big light on this endangered species. But along the way, I learned from a researcher at the New England Aquarium, who are the people that have been studying these whales since they were really discovered in the 1980s, this remnant population. He told me about a story that had occurred just a few years before I began my field work, and it was an extraordinary story. The story was that a couple of years before I began, this North Atlantic right whale was seen along the coast of Norway. Now, they hadn't seen a right whale in Norway in over 400 years. And nobody could figure out where this whale came from, why it was hanging out in this very specific place along the Norwegian coast. So somebody took a picture of it. They sent it to the New England Aquarium because they maintain a database of all 340 whales. And they said, "Do you know this whale?" And the researchers looked at their books and they said, "Yeah, we recognize that whale. It's an adult male named Porter. And he had just been seen a few weeks before in Cape Cod Bay. But nobody could imagine why he swam thousands of miles across the ocean and was in this very specific place." So eventually Porter swam back across the Atlantic. He rejoined his friends in Cape Cod Bay. They went up to the Bay of Fundy in Canada, as they do in the summertime. And nobody understood why it happened. It was one of those secrets of the whales. So a few years later, however, a German historian published a paper that sort of cast this incident in a mysterious new light. Turns out that that very stretch of coastline where Porter was hanging out was historical whaling grounds back in the 1600s in Norway, and the species that they hunted was the North Atlantic right whale. And there was even a whaling factory there, I believe, that used to process the dead whales. So these very traditional, dyed-in-the-wool scientists, not prone to fantasy or conspiracy theories or hyperbole, could conclude no other explanation other than it was a really random coincidence, or that these whales have culture, that they pass on stories from generation to generation, and that Porter had swam across the Atlantic Ocean to see where his ancestors had been killed. So that stuck with me. And over the last decade or so since I did that story, I started to think about how I could do a multi-species story about whales that really looked at whale culture. So I talked to researchers. I started to extrapolate. It really was born out of a friend of mine, Dr. Shane Garrow, who's a sperm whale biologist. And he was telling me about the whale cultures that he was working with in the Eastern Caribbean with sperm whales. So I sort of extrapolated. I looked at humpbacks, I looked at orca, looked at belugas, and tried to craft a story that would help bring people into the worlds of these animals. And for me, as you know, I guess, there's been this sort of trajectory of my photojournalism career where in the beginning, I was very selfish and just wanted to do stories about things that I liked, animals or places in which I was interested. And then, I began to see so many problems occurring in the world's oceans that I felt a sense of responsibility and a sense of urgency to tell those stories. But as a storyteller, as you certainly can appreciate, you're always looking for new ways to get people engaged. And for me, although Secrets of the Whales was not overtly a conservation story, my hope was that it would have that dividend, because if people could see the ocean or the planet through the lens of culture with another species, they might begin to care in a new way, about these families and the ancestral traditions that they have. So, I remember I had just completed 4 consecutive shark stories for the magazine, for National Geographic, and I was sitting with Sarah Lean at the time, the director of photography, at lunch in the cafeteria headquarters, and she said to me, "So Brian, what do you want to do next? What's your next idea?" And I said, "Well, I've been teasing this idea out about whale culture." And she put down her fork and she goes, "You can't photograph. How are you going to photograph whale culture?" And at the time, it wasn't fully fleshed out. So I was saying, well, I think the writing is going to have to do a lot of the heavy lifting. And anyway, but long story shorter, first pitched it to the magazine, then to TV, then to books, and was able to scale it up. And, it was like divine intervention. I write in my books, whales, that if you did a Venn diagram of all the things that have to line up to get whale pictures, you have to be in a place where there are whales. The visibility has to be good. The weather has to be good. The sun has to be shining. I can light a sea turtle, I can light a shark, but I can't light a 50-foot whale. So, the sun has to be out. The sun has to be shining on their face. If it's just lighting their tail, then I'll get some interesting pictures of tails, but then the whales have to be doing something interesting. Ideally, there's more than one, and they have to let me into their world. I mean, with one kick of their tail, they can leave me in their wake. So it was an ambitious project, an ambitious storyboard, an ambitious shot list. But in the end, I think we got everything we hoped for, and then there were some real jewels that we never would have been so bold.
I mean, that is what shocked me. The whole time I was watching, I was just thinking, it is a pin in a haystack, right? I mean, there are these scenes. I mean, how did you find that narwhal lone whale, in the middle of, can you tell that story, by the way? I mean, that was so captivating.
Right. This is a story of interspecies adoption, where a pod of beluga whales adopted this narwhal. But this was something that had been known about. It wasn't really a discovery by the film crew. But, again, you hear a story, you see a picture or two, but whether or not that animal is still there the following year or 2 years later, maybe after you saw that initial photograph, you go out and you hope that it is. And again, we just got very, very lucky. With the orca in New Zealand, where I had this female orca, sort of invite me to dinner, dropping this ray that she was predating on. This was the shortest trip of the project. We had 24 locations over 3 years from the equator to the poles. And in most locations, I was spending a few weeks, a month or two, or going back repeatedly. But that occurrence in New Zealand and with the orca, that happened in 2019. And I had that year been in Dominica and Sri Lanka and the Azores and the Canadian Arctic. And I was going to the Cook Islands and the Falkland Islands. And the shortest trip of all, about a 9 or 10-day trip to New Zealand. I had just been 6 weeks in the Canadian Arctic, came home for 2 days, repacked, and then went to New Zealand. And we were trying to capture something that scientists know happens, but the odds of seeing it and the odds of photographing or filming it are pretty slim. So I was staying in a motel. I was working with this wonderful researcher, Ingrid Visser, who's dedicated her life to orcas in New Zealand and around the world. And, days go by and nothing happens. And then one morning at 6 a.m., she called and said, I got a report. It's 3 hours north. So she was trailering her little boat behind her SUV 3 hours north along a windy road. I jumped in with a sound engineer for the film in our car, our truck, and we drove 3 hours. We get up there. We could see the orca at the edge of a harbor, still feeding miraculously, went out in the boat, and then I slipped into the water and I saw this whale swimming towards me with the ray in her mouth. It's like the Holy Grail. Here it is. I can get the picture. But before I could release the shutter, she dropped the ray. So I was like, oh, I almost wished I hadn't seen it. It would have been better than missing it. So I just swam down to the bottom where the ray was now dead on the bottom of the sea floor. And I was sort of kneeling next to it. And then I see that orca appear out of the right corner of my vision, and sort of swim behind my back and then emerge on the left side and then positions herself directly in front of me and looking at me and looking at the ray as if to say, I'm inviting you to dinner, this very altruistic sort of behavior that I've talked to orca scientists about since. And then when I didn't need it, she picked it up very gently. I got that picture and then she turned and did some food sharing with her family. But it was those kinds of things, getting the first images and footage of the sperm whale calf nursing. The scientist I was working with, like Shane Garrow, he said there's an old saying in the whale biology world that says someday we will know everything there is to know about whales except how a sperm whale calf nurses. They couldn't figure out the mechanics with that big lower jaw. But, this was a new mom. And this one day I was able to free dive down about maybe 50 or 60 feet. And she just let me into her world. In underwater photography, I don't have the luxury of using long telephoto lenses or waiting great deals of time. In a case like this, I'm holding my breath for 2 or 3 minutes at best, if that, and swimming down 60 feet. And I have to get within a few meters to make that picture. And she had enough trust and was calm enough to let me in at that very vulnerable moment. So it was an extraordinary gift all along the way to have these experiences and to be able to, produce a series of media products that I think,
It is
ultimately
so
resonate with
touching. If
people.
anybody has not seen it, it is so profoundly moving. That scene, there's a scene, can you also describe the scene of, what is it, thousands of belugas? Like you said maternity ward.
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly right. So, again, just for context, this is the population of belugas that you just described. We worked with a couple, but that one was the one where I spent the most time personally. And this is a population of whales that spends the wintertime in Greenland, where it's dark 24 hours a day. And then as the sun emerges in summer, they migrate hundreds of kilometers through the Northwest Passage and arrive at this place called Somerset Island in the Canadian high Arctic. It's an uninhabited island, and they've been going there for eons. And I describe it as their summer vacation. It's a place where they move into this estuary ecosystem. The ocean water is about 28.5 degrees Fahrenheit, about almost -2 Celsius. But the river that's flowing into this estuary is about 4 degrees warmer. So it's a place they come in the summer and they play on the gravel bottom. They use the rocks as a natural loofah to exfoliate their skin, and they're twirling around very gregarious way with the sunshine. They have their babies there. Scientists always thought they did, but were never 100% sure until we got that smoking gun evidence underwater. But this is a place that you're not allowed to go in the water. So before going, all the photos that had ever been done up there were on the surface. And you can do beautiful work on the surface, but I wanted that window into the polar playground there. So I had this idea to design some remote passive cameras that we could just leave on, and they would shoot every so often, sort of randomly, and hope that luck was with us. So I designed those with a friend of mine at Woods Hole Oceanographic, and then the final touch was put on it, an engineer at National Geographic. And, I got up there, and the first week, nothing was working. We were on satellite phones trying to troubleshoot and get it all tweaked and tricked out. Finally, we get it all working. And the idea was to place it in this river, this estuary, at low tide when the whales are not there. They only come in at high tide. And then it would shoot for 2 or 3 days. And my hope was that, if I remove the media card, there would be something usable on it. So we put it in there, moved it around a little bit. Finally, after a week, get the first images, and the composition of whales were there. The light was good. The exposure was good. Everything was good. But it was like looking through a bowl of Jello. What I didn't factor in, the halocline environment, the mixing of salt and fresh water, which, looking vertically was crystal clear, but horizontally it was very, very murky. So I was crushed, but undaunted, my assistant and I, we, tried to figure out the currents and when there might be clear water and move the cameras in different places. And my hope was that, if I put it in the right place, and if the whales came in at high tide in that place, and if there was a bubble of clear water, and if there was enough sunshine, we might get a picture. And it worked. We were able to get those pictures and video. And it really did, capture this playful beluga beach that I call it, where they come to play. There was dozens of them in a meter deep water, just playing. And we got gameplay where they pick up stones and pass them to each other. I mean, something that I never heard of. I know dolphins do that with seaweed or leaves, but nobody ever knew that belugas do. So, again, it was just this wonderful gift to that easily, could not
love that.
happen.
And there's another thing that I want to throw out there to all the photographers listening, is just how much time and persistence and commitment it takes to really, capture something that is evocative in that way and unique and shares some new information. It takes years, decades, in your case, really 4 decades, right? I mean, to get these storytelling moments. And I just say that for people, that I think the next generation of environmental storytellers to really, be patient, isn't it? I mean, or what do you think are the single most important things people should be thinking about?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Patience is the thing. And, sort of a derivative of that is be willing to wait and don't cut corners, don't fudge something. I mean, there's so many wonderful emerging and young photographers out there doing stuff. When we founded the International League of Conservation Photographers back in the mid-2000s, conservation photography wasn't even a thing. Nobody really knew what that meant. And today there's so many young photographers who are doing brilliant work in that space and beyond. Everybody that I'm looking at is doing really great work. But I think with competition and so forth, there can be this urge to cut corners or, kind of set something up or do something. And I think, your reward will be so much richer if you just invest the time. Now, I recognize it's not always easy. Not everybody has been commissioned by National Geographic or has a budget or can go and spend, years in a place. That's just not realistic. But, to the degree that you can work in places where you have repeatability and you can just work those things until you get something that maybe is unique in the world, it's really worth it. And we're at a place in time in history where we need those stories, we need those photographs, we need people to understand. So patience is by far the greatest tool.
And you actually queued up I can't let it go, but this is a moment for me to say that we've actually launched at Vital Impacts 2 $20,000 environmental storytelling grants specifically for this reason. You have to be a local photographer. I want to encourage stories in your backyard so you can have that repeatability. And then it's to give that a year-long project, because it takes more than a year. But I would say to do this kind of work, you really have to apply for grants. You have to find ways to fund this work and it helps when it's in your backyard and you can keep going back and really know the terrain. But so please apply for that. The deadline, we've actually extended the deadline a little bit, and just
Right.
check out vitalimpacts.org, and there's those grants and a mentoring program which Brian is going to be a part of. Thank you. We're so grateful and excited.
Oh,
And yeah, and I
brilliant.
do think that you mentioned another word, collaborative. There's no, I think
Hmm.
there's no more time in human history that we have to come up with solutions with collaboration. And then last thing I just came back from CES, and Nikon was talking about this. They're
Yeah.
working on a program. It's oh my gosh, I've already forgotten the words, rivulets and not biomimicry,
Oh,
uh, it's something where I know that they talked to you, Brian, about this can you
yeah.
describe the scale?
I-
Yeah.
No, I think Mike Corrado did mention it briefly in a conversation, but it was some time ago. And when you just mentioned that word, it sort of stimulated my memory. But I don't remember the details. But we need to get more info on that and share it, because I remember that it was an important
I'll give
program,
the
but I don't
brief that
have
I
the
remember
details.
is that they are actually they're using um, animals, wildlife, and biology to actually
Oh,
inform us on our greatest discoveries for, finding sustainable solutions. So, for example, they are studying the formation of, I guess, the skin of sharks, and they're now dreaming up this plan to like cover airplanes in this formation of the way the
that's
skin
right.
of sharks is, and it actually reduces the impact because it just goes through the sky more smoothly. I mean, I'm doing a terrible job of
Yeah.
describing.
No, Oh, no, I think that's exactly what it is. And you mentioned earlier biomimicry, and that is sort of what that is. I remember reading a story years ago about biomimicry where Olympic swimmers, they were having swimsuits made that mimicked shark skin with the dermal denticles, which help channel the water in a very hydrodynamic way, so that they pick up a millisecond or two in their swimming. So if an airplane can do the same thing, yeah. So the fact that Nikon is going down these roads, I think is really important. I mean, but it just sort of reinforces, I think, with those of us who spend time in the natural world out there know, and that is that all the answers are out there. The answers for everything. It's just how we work with it, instead of extracting and killing and using everything out in nature. We need to learn from it, right? I mean, that's where the beauty is. And if we can replicate some of these things that nature has designed over billions of years, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here,
That
so to
is the
speak.
best
So yeah.
takeaway. I mean, if you're going to leave with one thought, I think that's the single most powerful thought, is that the solutions are there, and it's through. I mean, I'm so grateful for the work that you've done. It's so incredibly inspiring to, that I mean, just for photographers, I think a lot of people feel hopeless. When you turn on, you read the news, it can feel overwhelming. And
Oh,
and to
every
remember though
I
that
know.
there are, we just have to prioritize this as, as something that is important to take care of and protect what we have right now.
Right, absolutely. I had a meeting yesterday with this wonderful marine biologist who specializes in sea turtles, and she was telling me about rights for nature. It's sort of this movement that she is part of, and it's actually, she works in Panama, where Panama has actually passed the law at the presidential level, at the government level, that gives animals and ecosystems rights, just not so different than human rights. So that if you see something happening, whether it's a coral reef being destroyed or a specific species, being damaged, you can have a court case basically to advocate on behalf of that species or that habitat. And when she was telling me this, it sort of it was epiphany. It gave me chills because it seems so very basic that we would appreciate that. It's almost an indigenous culture way of seeing the world, but you know, for so long in the Western world or in quote civilized world, we don't do that, and that's a mistake. But those are the kinds of things I'd like to think that can be that tipping point, you know, in history. I mentioned to her that, you know, it reminds me of cigarette smoking or seat belts in the United States, where, you know, at a time when I was growing up, everybody was smoking cigarettes, nobody wore seat belts, and then almost like overnight, it transformed, where it just changed the culture, and we did things in a probably wiser way. And wouldn't it be nice if you know, rights for nature could have that same sort of trajectory, where one day all of a sudden humankind, you know, realizes we're not above or apart from nature, but we're, you know, intimately connected to it, and we proceed accordingly so that, you know, the planet is healthy for the future. I mean, it's a simplistic view, but it's not. I mean, sometimes the most complex problems are, you know, solved with elegant, simple equations. So, you know, I think that's what gives me hope. I agree. It's doom and gloom so much every day, but then you meet somebody, you know, like this, who just has this idea, and you realize, you know, there are people out there who provide
There is a
real
lot
light,
of
you
light
know.
out there for sure. Brian, I'm so grateful that
Mm.
you're a part of. I just want to also do a shout out. If anybody's interested, you can purchase Brian's amazing print. I'm going to just add this, I mean, not amazing, it's really,
Mm.
really moving. And go watch the film series and get his book as well to partner up with this print. But the money is going to go back to support environmental storytelling grants. It's also going to go back to Jane Goodall's Institute and the work that she's doing, I mean, her organization is doing to really cultivate the next generation of people that are caring for the planet. And then we just have so many more plans. I just think it's all about collaborating and thank you for all of your
Well,
commitment and work and yes, I don't know.
look, Amy, and right back at you. I know you're rather modest, but the work that you're doing and what Vital Impacts is doing is substantial. It is amazing and impactful. I mean, the word is in the name. But you know, as I think we both can agree, we're living at this pivotal moment in history where maybe for the very first time we understand both the problems and the solutions. And the key is creating a will among the people to move toward those solutions. And it's achieved in large part through education, through understanding what those problems are. And a big part of understanding is visual. We are visual creatures. We respond as humans emotionally to powerful photographs and images, and those can tell the story. So for all the photographers out there, you know, working with researchers trying to tell these stories, it's vital work what you're doing by raising money for these organizations and to help fund mentorships with grants with young photographers. That's what we need to be doing. So you know, to be continued for sure. And I'm in 1,000%. And I can't thank you enough for all that you and your team
Oh,
have
Brian,
created.
thank you. And where can I just ask, where are you headed next?
You know, I'm working on 3 different projects right now: a magazine story, a documentary film, and a television series. But they're all sort of regionally based here in the Northeast where I live. So by pure serendipity, this happened, and I've actually been able to, you know, be at home a lot more. I mean, I'm still out in the field. I'm traveling a lot for speaking engagement, and probably next year in 2024, I'll go further afield. But right now, the last couple of years and this year, these substantial projects, but sort of regionally based for me. They're international projects, but they're locally based. So it's been nice. You know, my wife recognizes me, and my dog knows who I am now. Um, It's, you know, and then I'll break that up next year probably and go back. But anyway, yeah. So staying kind of in movement
Wonderful.
at the moment.
Oh, well, thank you so much for taking the time again and all of everything that you do, and hopefully see you in a few weeks. Take
You
care.
bet. Absolutely. All
Bye.
righty. Thanks for doing this.
Bye.
Bye bye.